thank you for listening to Curious Cat, the podcast that examines the shadowy space where science and the supernatural collide. I'm your host, Jennifer Holtz. Join me every week as I explore what it means to be a soul in a meat suit. Welcome to Curious Cat. This entire episode comes with a trigger warning. It is not for the faint of heart. Be warned. For those that are still with me, have you ever heard of spontaneous human combustion? I'd argue one of the most mysterious ways to die. If true, then why does this phenomenon stop and then start over the course of a century and a half, and then just disappear? Let's get into it. Let's begin at the beginning. Spontaneous human combustion, or SHC, is the idea that a person's body can catch fire without an apparent external source of ignition. The term was coined in the 19th century, and the phenomenon has been debated for centuries. So how to explain spontaneous human combustion? This comes from psmagazine.com. Katie Heaney writes, "While there's no proof that any human being has ever suddenly burst into flames and died, there's also no proof that it hasn't happened." Heaney continues, "At some point in the 15 hours or so prior to the evening of March 26, 1986, a 58-year-old former firefighter named George Mott apparently burst into flames. He died. When he was found that night, what remained of him were mostly the ashes on the floor beneath his mattress, which his body had apparently burned through. There was more, but reports vary a little as to what. Wikipedia says they found an implausibly shrunken skull, as opposed to the plausible level of shrunkenness, I guess, and a piece of a rib cage. Others say it was a shrunken skull and the lower half of his right leg. Either way, the scene found in Mott's Crown Point, New York apartment was pretty grim. It was also, for reasons beyond just the obvious, weird. For one, there was no heat or fire damage to the ceilings, which were low. Everything inside the closed refrigerator was melted. A number of plastic objects, wall ornaments, a plastic fly swatter around the apartment were melted also. But investigators could not identify the source of the damage. No gas leaks, accelerants, signs of suicide, or foul play. Mott was not a smoker. It didn't make sense. Eventually, investigators would rule that the fire was caused by one of two things: a gas leak or an electrical arc that shot out from an outlet onto Mott and set him on fire. There wasn't any evidence found to support either claim. According to most people, there just wasn't much evidence to support any other claims either. To the professionals, that Mott was a firefighter who burned to death in his own home was likely just an unfortunately semi-poetic coincidence. Even firefighters have to die in one way or another. On the other hand, if you were neither a scientist nor a police officer, but a self-designated student of the supernatural and an enthusiastic, if haphazard, researcher of unexplained phenomenon, a former firefighter burned almost totally to ashes in an otherwise largely unharmed apartment, it's the kind of thing, and this is going to sound bad, but I don't mean it that way, you dream about, she writes. For M. Sue Benford, author of a book called Strong Women, Unshrouding the Secrets of the Soul, which seems from its description to be equal parts self-help and theorizing about the Shroud of Turin, the purported burial cloth worn by Jesus Christ, and Larry E. Arnold, who's the author of a book about spontaneous human combustion with the excitable title Ablaze. There had to be more to Mott's story. It used to be that when a fire started and nobody was quite sure why, it was either God or the devil to blame. Spontaneous human combustion, or the apparently sudden and inexplicable burning of a living human being, is sort of a real thing, maybe. If you ask Benford and Arnold, you'll get a statistic that varies somewhat between 200 and 400 cited cases of SHC have occurred over the past 300 years or so. Of course, cited doesn't mean that that's what it is on the official death certificate. These are just cases, like Mott's, that seem a little odd. The defining characteristics of a potential case of SHC are: number one, a high degree of bodily incineration partnered with a comparatively minimal level of damage to the surroundings. Number two, burning centered around the torso. Number three, no obvious signs of an external cause of the fire. And number four, the victim is found alone with little to no sign of having struggled. Near the end of the 17th century, the discovery of phosphorus in human bones prompted the theory that fire came from within us, and it could be provoked in certain people upon their engagement in conveniently frowned upon activities like women who drank alcohol. But in the early to mid 19th century, medical scientists discovered the combustibility of body fat. This is the way scientists explain virtually all cases of SHC. A body becomes ignited, and the fat, typically centered around the torso, which is why so many of the bodies in these cases show the most burn damage there, begins to burn. The victim's clothing then soaks up liquefied body fat. Okay, I'm so sorry for the visuals, and acts like the wick that keeps the body burning. And yes, this is me again, not the article. I am definitely bringing my abs into my body, kind of doing some core work as I do this right now because I don't want to make myself burn up. Back to the article though. This process is called wick effect, and it explains nearly every issue a person could raise about SHC, except if you're not so easily satisfied, this one: how did the body ignite in the first place? You have to take any study published in the journal Subtle Energies and Energy Medicine with a big grain of salt, maybe 5. That's where in 1997, Benford and Arnold published a study called Scientific Analysis of an Artifact from a Presumed Episode of SHC, a possible case for biological nuclear reactions. In it, the authors seek to prove the existence of SHC by analyzing a piece of evidence recovered from the scene of Mott's death, a book jacket taken from a hardcover on a shelf. It's hard for most of us anyway to accept the idea that a plastic-coated book cover could in any way be used to prove that a human, just a handful of feet away, burst into flames for no apparent reason. But let's hear them out. Mott's book jacket was discolored all along the front, as if the heat source had been directly and evenly applied. This is somewhat strange, per Benford and Arnold, for a book that had apparently been lying back covered down on the shelf. In an attempt to replicate the burn damage seen on Mott's book cover, Benford and Arnold tested 2 theories. One was an open flame and another in a furnace. Neither looked like Mott's, and the latter was reduced entirely to ash. There are a number of other very scientific-sounding tests done here: an XPS analysis of the book's jacket's atomic surface content, and another that checks for the level of carbon present, which is atypically elevated. According to Benford Benford and Arnold, one reasonable explanation for the jacket's chemical makeup is a biologically induced nuclear explosion, or SHC. Of course, they also acknowledge that another explanation might be that the jacket was made with carbon-heavy pulp from the inside of a very old tree. But SHC sounds better, doesn't it? There are certainly cases from time to time of people dying by fire in weird and isolated circumstances. The bad news is that we're generally more flammable than our ancestors like to believe, and that under the right or very wrong circumstances, our bodies can act, as Wikipedia so alarmingly puts it, like, quote, inside out candles, end quote. But the good news is that according to genuine scientists, it's never actually spontaneous. There had to probably be something external to George Mott's body that started the fire. We just don't get to know what that is. Either you can live with not knowing, or like Benford and Arnold, you can't. Okay, I've combed old newspapers, dusty bookstores, and the internet to bring you more of the strangest fire-related deaths. So right off the top, AI may say that spontaneous human combustion cases began in the 1700s, but in a rare 1654 booklet titled Historiarum Atomicarium Rariorum, Thomas H. Bartholini describes the risk faced by some medieval unfortunates and the predicament of wine imbibers igniting internally. In Collection Academy, Professor Matthias Jacobus described the death of a woman of, quote, the lower class, end quote, who for her last 3 years had consumed liquor to the point of not taking any nourishment. She sat down one evening on a straw chair to sleep, and during the night was consumed along with her chair by an internal fire, to the extent that only her skull and extreme joints of her fingers were found. All the rest was reduced to cinders. 1725. That evening, Jean Millet went to bed with his wife at around 8 o'clock. At about 2 in the morning, a strange odor from the kitchen pervaded the hotel. Millet sprang from his bed and shouted the dreaded alarm all inn lodgers dread: fire. Like them, an apprentice surgeon followed his nose and his curiosity. The infectious odor, as Lecat, the surgeon, described it, led him to that kitchen. There he found not only the inn burning, but the innkeeper's wife. The woman's body had wholly disintegrated without burning the nearby wooden furniture. Lecat vowed to his death that her cause of death was due to, quote, the visitation of God, or what we now call spontaneous human combustion. March 14th, 1731, Verona, Italy. Countess Cornelia Bandi died a mysterious death. Cornelia, 62, was well off and healthy by all accounts. She lived a stone's throw from the Adriatic Sea. While dining that night before, she experienced a quick onset of what was described as dull and heavy drowsiness, and she retired to her bedchamber early. The next morning, a maid entered that bedchamber and immediately wished she hadn't. 4 feet from the Countess's bed lay a heap of ashes, 2 untouched legs, foot to knee, intact. Her stockings were still on. Between them was her head, and when authorities lifted her remains, they found a greasy and stinking moisture. Even stranger, there was a loathsome, yellowish, oily substance trickling from the windows. What happened to the Countess that night? The fire had been confined to the Countess. She alone suffered the destruction of the fire. The only conclusion they came up with was that Countess Bandi had, quote, burned to ashes while standing as her skull fell, where it was found between her legs, end quote. Unlike every case prior, alcohol was not involved. The Countess did not drink that night. In fact, she never drank. I spoke too soon, though. Alcohol was involved, just not in a way anyone could have guessed. It took time to speak with the people in the Countess's life. As they conducted interviews, a fuller picture took place. Contessa loved to take baths. She was known to bathe in camphorated spirit of wine, which is another way of saying alcohol, and it surely contributed to her death. Paris, France, May 1828. As reported by the New England Farmer newspaper out of Boston, Massachusetts, quote, in May last, M.J. Fontenelle read in the Academy of Sciences at Paris a memoir on the spontaneous combustion of the human body. M.J. establishes incontestably the reality of the phenomenon and relates 15 observations of SHC. Most of the 15 persons who took fire spontaneously and were consumed were women immoderately addicted to the use of spirituous liquors. In all cases, the body and viscera were burned, while the feet, hands, and the top of the head escaped. The combustion takes place in those who are the prey of a violent internal heat. The presence of a burning body is not necessary to produce spontaneous combustion, and water, so far from extinguishing the flame, seems to render it more active. The fire does not burn combustible objects placed near it. 2 persons were consumed at the same time in the same apartment without burning the furniture or the apartment. The body consumes in just a few hours, and what remains consists of greasy ashes and soot, having a fetid odor which extends to a great distance. St. Petersburg, Florida, 1972. As reported by Kentwood News, Louisiana, an article titled "The Horror of Spontaneous Human Combustion" reads, in what has become a classic case of spontaneous human combustion, Mrs. Mary Reeser of St. Petersburg, Florida, was last seen relaxing comfortably in an armchair in her apartment at 9 p.m. on Sunday evening. When a telegram was delivered to her 11 hours later, nothing remained of the 170-pound woman but a shrunken skull, 1 vertebrae, and a left foot wearing the charred remains of a black slipper. Among the bizarre factors involved in that July 2, 1951 case are the following. The windows of Mrs. Reeser's apartment were open all night, yet no one smelled or saw any smoke. The apartment itself, although unbearably hot, was almost completely unscathed. The rooms were coated with oily soot above a 4-foot line only. The armchair lamp, chairside table, and a small portion of the carpet directly beneath the armchair, yes, those were destroyed. Nothing else, though, was damaged. It is known to require a temperature of 3,000 degrees to so completely consume a human body. A spokesperson for a mattress company said that there is not nearly enough material in any overstuffed chair to cremate a human body. And now I'm wondering why they went into mattress making when they should have gone into being a funeral director with that knowledge. But anyway, and none of the material, that person continues, which generally comprises such a chair, cotton, felt, hair, foam, rubber, is capable of bursting into violent flames. Even more curious, Mrs. Reeser's skull shrunk to the size of a baseball, yet in all other known cases of intense heat, the skull expands and sometimes even explodes in pieces. The investigating fire chief said that he had never seen anything like the incredible cremation in all of his years in the department. An arson agent for the National Board of Underwriters stated that he had no idea what could have caused the fire. The police chief announced that an FBI report indicated that there was no evidence that any kind of inflammable fluids, volatile liquids, chemicals, or other accelerants had been used to set the widow's body ablaze. SHC seems to strike without warning and without leaving a clue. On March 26, 1965, Herbert Shin of Camp Chaffee Road, Foster Park, California, was found with severe burns on his chest, back, and spine. He died 30 minutes later in a hospital. Investigators found absolutely no evidence of fire anywhere in Shin's house or yard. On August 19, 1966, Doris Lee Jacobs burned to death in her trailer home. Officials could offer zero explanation for the burns, which covered over 95% of her flesh, because it had been the woman, not the trailer, that had burst into flames. At Chelmsford, England, on September 20th, 1938, a woman burst into blue flames in the midst of a crowded dance floor. No one was able to extinguish the blaze that seemed to be fed by her own flesh, and in minutes she was but a heap of ashes. On January 4th, 1970, Ed James was removed from the Hotel Phillips in Kansas City when a bellman found him lying of fire on the floor. James suffered burns on the top of his feet, the top of his knees, and the left side of his face, chest, and arms, yet his clothing was not even singed. At this point, no investigator really seems to know what set of circumstances might bring body cells to the critical stage at which they might spontaneously burst into flames that feed upon the body's own fatty tissue. We must face the grisly fact that spontaneous human combustion might occur to anyone, even us. One final article comes from the pages of the Kingston Whig Standard newspaper from Ontario, Canada, dated May 2nd, 1979. A letter to the editor caught my eye, authored by Scott Foster. He writes, "As for spontaneous human combustion, Dickinson restricts such deaths to living victims, but I would indicate the body of Mrs. Betty Satlow, who died in Hoquiam, Washington in December of 1973, combusted spontaneously within her coffin in the Coleman mortuary. Details of this gruesome event are to be found in the San Francisco Chronicle, dated December 26, 1973, page 7. I seriously doubt this awesome phenomenon would account for the shroud's image or the disappearance of Christ's body," because he's speaking of the Shroud of Turin. Reflecting on those stories I just shared, I plucked from old newspapers, I got some from books and the internet. Can we find some common ground when it comes to spontaneous human combustion? Are you noticing patterns? Victims. The victims are often described as older, overweight, and sometimes alcoholic. Burn patterns. The middle of the body is oftentimes reduced to ashes, while the head and extremities are less damaged. The surroundings of the body are also usually minimally damaged. Other evidence, a bad-smelling, oily substance is often noted. Considering human beings are 70+% water and we have to season wood, which means to dry it out over the course of a year or more in order to build a steady fire with it, I find SHC to be nearly impossible to fathom. Here are some possible explanations of SHC. All right, so here they are. The wick effect. Clothing can soak up melted fat and act like a candle wick, allowing the body to smolder for a long time, like earlier was described as an inside-out candle. Alcohol. Alcohol doesn't make the body more flammable, they say, but severe inebriation can impair a person's ability to react to a fire. How about undetected ignition? A match, a cigarette, or electrical spark could have started the fire, but the evidence was destroyed by the flames. I'm unusually interested in the connection to alcohol and went down a rabbit hole. Was alcohol in the 17th and 18th centuries different than what's consumed today? Here's what I was able to find. In the 1700s, alcohol was often made at home, but it was illegal to distill alcohol at home. Instead, people used ready-made distilled alcohols as a base for infusions or to mix with other ingredients. This does not seem healthy. The alcohol produced in the 1700s probably tasted different from today's alcohol too, because the distillation process produced more toxins. What? More toxins? Okay, put a pin in that. The column still was invented in the 1800s, which resulted in purer, higher quality spirits. Okay, so back to the toxins and much more pure and refined alcohol from the column still. Could those be the culprits? Add to that fact pattern, it was way more common in the 17th and 18th centuries that people smoked. We are talking over 50% of people smoked. Yeah, that's a lethal mix. Flammable alcohol with matches and pipes or other smoking tobaccos, those are the logical murder suspects. A final note. This is what AI says about SHC. Quote, the scientific consensus is that SHC is a pseudoscience and that the reported cases are actually caused by an overlooked external source of ignition, end quote. Here's an SHC fun fact. Charles Dickens' novel Bleak House, it featured a character who died by SHC, which helped bring the phenomenon to the public's attention. From the National Institute of Health, let's look at SHC in the light of the 21st century. The term spontaneous human combustion refers to a situation when a human body is found with significant portions of the middle parts of the body reduced to ashes, much less damage to the head and extremities, and minimal damage to the surrounding areas. Typically, no observable source of ignition is found in the vicinity of the victim, and a bad-smelling, oily substance is noted. In the past, such a situation was erroneously attributed to supernatural powers. Such a phenomenon occurs in the absence of any witness. The purpose of this review article was to analyze articles published from January 1, 2000 on this unique type of burn injury. Further aims were to gather and present data on the causes and events leading to this situation. The literature was reviewed with PubMed interface using the keyword spontaneous human combustion and preternatural combustion. Specific inclusion criteria resulted in 12 patients. That's it. A unique sequence of events takes place for the human body to incinerate to ashes. The flame burn victim has to die for the body fat to start melting. A tear in the skin has to occur for the melted fat to impregnate the charred clothes, igniting a wick effect that produces localized heat for extended period. A phenomenon called spontaneous human combustion is reality. The term SHC has nuances which are not applicable to this situation or to these modern times. Therefore, we suggest a new term, fat wick burns. Very interesting article. Larry Arnold, that I mentioned earlier, and Jonathan Smith write for Vice. Larry Arnold is the author of Ablaze, The Mysterious Fires of Spontaneous Human Combustion, and the world's foremost expert on exploding people. Here he gives us a summary of why SHC is so difficult to explain through science, as well as his best estimations of what might cause it. SHC has always been, if you'll excuse the pun they write, a hotly debated subject. Oh my God, dad joke. The usual outcome is that the victim's body is almost entirely consumed to powder. SHC is frightful and horrific. It challenges what experts understand about the effect fire has on the human body. Due to its bizarre nature, it is easier for academics to deny cases of SHC and invoke more comfortable scenarios, such as the human wick theory, in which a person's clothing plays wick to the fuel of the human fat. or simply they refuse to accept the evidence altogether, they write. While I haven't been able to come up with a single mechanism that is applicable across the hundreds of cases I've studied, I have developed a few theories concerning what I believe could cause a human being to spontaneously combust. One of my favorite explanations is the subatomic pyrotron theory. Doesn't that sound like the name of a carnival ride? But anyway, he goes on. It's based on quantum physics. The theory states that there is an extremely small but high-powered particle, like a neutrino, that zips through the spaces between the quarks that make up the atoms, which compose the molecules of the human body. On rare occasions, a rogue particle scores a direct hit with a quark and sets off an internal chain reaction. I've dubbed this occurrence the internal Hiroshima effect, which may result in SHC. Another theory concerns Kundalini, an energy that flows up and down the spinal column of every living human being. Although Kundalini is well known to Eastern physicians and metaphysicians, it's less so in the Western world. Kundalini is a very powerful bioenergy that, among other psychokinetic phenomenon, can produce intense internal temperature spikes when out of balance. While I'm not entirely sure what causes Kundalini to become unbalanced, in some cases factors such as one's state of consciousness and emotional distress seem to affect it. Some people can increase their Kundalini energy through meditation, while others have reported spontaneous movement of energies throughout the body without attempting to accelerate the flow. You can picture the out-of-balanced energy as a quasi-plasma-like ball that seems to originate in the abdominal region. Strangely, whatever lies anatomically beyond the radius of that ball of energy usually escapes incineration. From what I have observed, the radius of the sphere is normally about 1 foot to 1.5 feet, which means that the victim's extremities are often left unburned, but their torso is reduced to ash. The third theory I'm working on is called the cartography of combustion. I've plotted the many instances of abnormal fire phenomenon relating to people and property in the United Kingdom. I've noticed that most can be connected by straight alignments. Some lines link 5, 6, or sometimes as many as 12 anomalous fires. Our findings are somewhat similar to the idea of ley lines, which are based on the supposed geographic alignments of things like ancient monuments and other places of interest that are traditionally associated with earth energy mysteries. I believe these connections follow lines of energy that flow around the planet and that heretofore unknown and unidentified geophysical energy, under the correct circumstances, can cause spontaneous combustion in property, buildings, and people. Although I am constantly speculating about what could cause those patterns to manifest, at least he's being self-aware here. At this point, I have nothing I can take into a scientific lab and reproduce under controlled conditions. This is essentially why it's so easy for the experts and the scientific orthodoxy to dismiss spontaneous human combustion. It is truly spontaneous. Okay, by the way, I have linked to Larry's book in the show notes. You can give it a look. I bought it and it's kind of a slow read, not gonna lie, but I am gonna make my way through it because it is very interesting. SHC had its heyday, it seems, in the UK between the 17 and the 1800s. Then largely it went away. The observation that most victims drank excessively, might have smoked, trended on the heavier side. Well, America right now has never been heavier. Where is the streak of spontaneous human combustion to match? Many of us carry lithium batteries in our pockets to boot, either as smartphones or vape pens. I think the oily stench and the residue is the real clue here. Some combination of failing organs maybe, and matches or powerful alcohol led to these accidents. What I did not highlight is the way these cases endure today as these freaky footnotes. There was a doctor in England that made a career of traveling the island, telling lecture halls of money-wielding folks about the weirdest ways people have died. That alone helped perpetuate what I think was incompetent investigations. Maybe they were hurried investigations, but I don't think it's a real phenomenon. Hang on after the music for a very special installment of The Curious Q. Until next week, stay curious. I love you. It's time for the Curious Q, a quick rundown of the week's weirdest headlines. I only have one headline for you this week, and I have one story I'd like to share with you. This first and only headline comes from Coast to Coast AM. Security camera films dog transforming into a person. A bizarre piece of security camera footage from Mexico shows what appears to be a person transforming, who some have surmised is a supernatural shapeshifter. This weird video reportedly popped up on social media last week with the claim that it occurred in the state of Veracruz, though no further details surrounding this strange scene have been revealed. Be that as it may, the footage is undeniably fantastic. In the video, a dog can be seen running into an empty backyard. As it swiftly moves through the property, it turns and then it transforms into a nearly transparent person who seems to become more solid as he's running out of view and ultimately vanishes from sight. Check out this strange video with the link below. Okay, we are on the heels of two huge hurricanes, and I'll be doing a show that talks about the speculation about weather manipulation. We are also going to be talking about the patents for machines to manipulate weather and instances when our government used weather manipulation to try to win wars. But we just survived Milton and Helena, and I would ask you if you have any urge to do something to give to Samaritan's Purse or the American Red Cross so that they can help with the effort to rebuild those areas. But with the second one, with Hurricane Milton, it was very emotionally charged for me. I have a beloved daughter that's down there with their beloved partner who's important to me as well, and their cat Apollo. Their whole school community and their city of Tampa has become very near and dear to me. So I didn't know what to do with myself, and I have been watching Grooving Goddesses videos on YouTube, or actually on Instagram, for months and months and months. She's a person that I've followed, and I also follow her Patreon, and I find her really interesting. She follows solar flare patterns, and she looks at world events, and I knew she had a group of people that were doing grid work across the earth. It's a bunch of people that we meditate, we set our intention, and we try to make an impact and heal the earth, and maybe sometimes help dissipate storms. So this week I thought, if I can get my act together and stop leading with fear and instead come to a place of love, I would like to join their effort, which I did. And it was beautiful. It was an amazing thing to be a part of, and I hope to do more work like that in the future. What we did it's the most woo thing I have ever done. And I am a psychopomp. I cross over souls. So this even exceeded that. First, Andrea, who's the Grooving Goddess, got us into a meditation state. and it was pure love. There was no fear. It was just love. And then we started invoking dragons, all different dragons with all different properties to them to help eat the storm, Hurricane Milton. And at the time that we began this, it was a Hurricane Cat 5, and they were thinking of coming up with a new category 6 for Hurricane Milton because it was, I think it's 6 would be the new designation. Don't quote me on that. But they were really, really concerned about the wallop that this storm was going to have, especially on Tampa where it was supposed to hit the land. And what we did is we used our collective energy and our collective prayers, and across the globe, others of all different faiths and no faiths were coming together to try to make an impact on that storm and slow Milton's roll. That was our whole goal, to slow it. Mother Earth told us for some reason it had to happen, but it didn't need to be as devastating as it was. And so we just concerted our effort to having earth dragons that I picture like big pieces of pumice or a giant sponge come over Milton and soak up that excess moisture, that excess water, and then distribute it across the globe to places that were suffering drought. So we're restoring balance. We asked dragons to turn some of that excess water that is so powerful about a hurricane into steam. And so it was able to go into the atmosphere and go elsewhere. And I don't know if you guys have seen the GIFs from it, the video, but after the meeting, 37 minutes later, they had already reduced this Cat 5 to a Cat 3. And it was a weak Cat 3, even though it was terrible and it did horrible things. And the tornadoes were devastating. And my heart goes out to the entire state of Florida, as it does with North Carolina with Hurricane Helene. But going back to the effort that we had, it was amazing because before it hit landfall, Milton's eye collapsed. And prior to that even happening, the storm broke in two. It turned into a smaller storm and then the more medium-sized storm. We have an impact. And I'm not asking you to believe. I'm just telling you what was crazy about it is that we were invoking these dragons to do this work and just send our love and help any way we could. The dragons, we asked them to fly counterclockwise within the eye of Milton, which is the opposite way that the storm spins, and just slow it down, slow its approach. And as we were invoking these dragons, I kept hearing these creaks on my roof. And Andrea said, you probably already know your dragons have probably just made themselves apparent to you. And what's funny about that is that for about a month prior to this meeting on Monday, I kept experiencing, with no weather outside, there would not be wind, there was not rain, it was just sunny and clear. I would hear this heavy thud on the roof. And I know when an owl lands on my roof, it's pretty soft compared to these, like the entire roof going thud. And I realized during the work session, the earth grid work we did, it's the dragons. They knew I was going to be working with them and they're just like excited. What is time? What is time even? They knew, they'd already seen the future. So I have this new thing that I've been a part of, and I absolutely identify with the dragon energy and I love them. And I've told them that they're welcome anytime to land on my roof and get some healing and some unconditional love. So that's my weird story this week. Sending you love and thanks for getting weird with me. I'll see you next week. I love you.
Hey, you. Yes, you. Are you looking for a new podcast that appeals to your scientific curiosity, but is also a little bit spooky?
Show me how I died in a past life.
Well, look no further, because this cat is where it's at.
He had concerns about the ethics surrounding AI, feeling they had achieved consciousness.
Curious Cat Podcast examines the shadowy space where science and the supernatural collide. Listen every week with your host, Jennifer Holtz, as she and her guests explore what it means to be a soul in a meat suit.
We were healing karma together. They were all kind of predestined to resolve something.
Listen on all your favorite streaming apps and continue the conversation on Twitter at CuriousCatPodCA, or find Jennifer and all her links at Jennifer L. Holtz, spelled HOTES.com.